Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled you're joining us. Look, if you're stepping into literally any kind of research, whether that's for academia, business, or maybe public policy, you know that data is the absolute lifeblood of your work. But let's be real, finding the right data and making sure it's actually solid, that can feel completely overwhelming. So today, we are going to figure out how to expertly navigate and appraise existing research data so you can build your work on a rock-solid foundation.
Just think about it for a second. Why on earth should you spend countless hours and potentially thousands of dollars designing new surveys, hiring field workers, and just collecting brand new data from scratch when mountains of perfectly good data might already be out there just waiting to be discovered? As researchers, we kind of have this bias toward doing it all ourselves, but leveraging existing work, that's often the smartest first step you can take.
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. We're going to quickly cover the power of secondary data, published versus unpublished sources, why you need to proceed with caution, evaluating data reliability, checking data suitability, and finally, ensuring data adequacy. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The power of secondary data. Working smarter, not harder.
So using secondary data is essentially a massive shortcut. It absolutely lets you work smarter, not harder. Basically, by standing on the shoulders of the researchers, the governments, and the organizations that came before you. To guide us through this, we're drawing heavily from a truly foundational text on the subject. It's called Research Methodology, Methods and Techniques by C.R. Kothari. This book is an absolute goldmine for understanding the rigorous, systematic approach required to conduct really high-quality research. And Kothari just beautifully lays out the rules for handling existing data.
Right, let's establish our definitions here. Primary data is the data you collect yourself, completely afresh for the very first time. It is totally original. Secondary data, on the other hand, has already been collected by someone else, and crucially, it's already passed through a statistical process. Think of it this way. If primary data is you going deep into the mine and swinging a pickaxe to find gold, secondary data is someone just handing you a refined gold bar. Pretty great, right?
Moving on to Section 2, Published versus Unpublished Sources, Where the Treasure Lives.
If secondary data is the treasure, where exactly does this treasure live? Well, Kothari divides these into two massive buckets, starting with published sources. Now, published sources are generally highly accessible. These are the documents meant to be seen by the public. We're talking publications from central, state, and local governments, international bodies, technical journals, books, and official reports from banks and business associations. Basically, it's a vast public library of statistical power just waiting for you.
But then we have the unpublished sources. And oh man, these are the hidden gems. They take a bit more digging to uncover because, well, they weren't necessarily broadcast to the world. We're talking about personal diaries, letters, unpublished biographies, the raw records kept by other research scholars, or even private data held by trade associations and labor bureaus. Often, this unpublished data can give you incredibly unique insights that your peers might simply overlook. Section 3. Proceed with caution. Fool's gold. Now, here is where we absolutely need to make a sharp pivot. Before you just copy and paste someone else's statistics into your own project, you have got to hit the brakes. You need a heavy, heavy dose of analytical skepticism. Otherwise, that gold bar you thought you found might actually just be fool's gold. Kothari highlights this brilliant quote from Dr. A.L. Bowley, which perfectly captures the exact mindset you need to have. It is never safe to take published statistics at their face value without knowing their meaning and limitations. Basically, you cannot blindly trust data just because it's printed in a fancy book or published on a government website. You must scrutinize it.
Section 4. Evaluating data reliability. Who, what, and how. To do that scrutiny we just talked about, Kothari outlines 3 strict precautions you absolutely must take before using secondary data. The very first one is evaluating reliability. And reliability is exactly what it sounds like. Can this data actually be trusted? Think of it like buying a used car. You wouldn't just look at the shiny exterior and hand over your cash, right? No way. You'd want the history report. You need to know who drove it, how it was maintained, if it's ever been in a crash. Well, you have to do the exact same thing with secondary data. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how practical Kothari's framework is for testing this reliability. You really need to interrogate the source. Who actually collected this data? Did the compiler have an inherent bias, or maybe a vested interest in the results? Then, you've got to interrogate the methods. What were their sources? Did they use statistically sound, proper methods? And finally, look at the context. At what time was this collected? Because data from, say, 1995 might be perfectly reliable for historical context, but it's going to be entirely unreliable for current market trends. You also have to ask what level of accuracy the original researchers desired, and crucially, if they actually achieved it.
Section 5. Checking data suitability. Does it fit? Okay, so let's say the data passes the reliability test with flying colors. It was collected perfectly by a completely unbiased source. You're good to go, right? Actually, wrong. That brings us to our second precaution, checking data suitability. Suitability means asking, does this data actually fit my specific problem? Because data that is absolutely perfect and highly reliable for one researcher's inquiry might be entirely unsuitable for yours. It's kind of like Cinderella's glass slipper. It's a perfectly good, highly reliable shoe, but if it doesn't fit your foot, you just can't wear it to the ball.
So, the crucial point here is that you have to meticulously compare the original research to your own. Step 1. Scrutinize the definition of terms and units. If the original study defined middle class completely differently than you do, the data doesn't fit. Step 2. Study the object and scope of their original inquiry. Why did they collect this in the first place? And step 3, and honestly, this requires incredible discipline. If meaningful differences exist between their scope and yours, you must walk away. Seriously, do not try to jam a square peg into a round hole just because the data happens to be convenient.
Section 6. Ensuring data adequacy. Is it enough? All right, so if your data is both reliable and suitable, you are almost there. But you have one final pillar in Kothari's triad to clear, and that is ensuring data adequacy. Adequacy asks one very simple question. Is it enough? This is primarily about scale, scope, and precision. You might find a study that is highly reliable and the definitions perfectly suit your needs, but if the dataset is just too small or way too broad, it falls apart under the weight of your specific inquiry.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dividing line. Data becomes inadequate if the level of accuracy the original researchers settled for is simply too low for the precision you need today. Similarly, if you are studying the economic impact in a specific state, but the secondary data you found covers the entire country, or conversely, maybe just one single tiny neighborhood, it's totally inadequate. The area covered absolutely must precisely align with your current study for the data to be considered adequate. So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. The very next time you're tempted to just pull a statistic or a data set from a published report and drop it directly into your work, take a pause. Ask yourself, have I really vetted this? Is my research being built on a truly solid foundation, or am I building a house of cards with secondary data that hasn't been rigorously checked for reliability, suitability, and adequacy? If you apply Kothari's precautions, your research is going to be stronger, sharper, and infinitely more trustworthy. Thanks so much for exploring this with us.